So I'll be, as you're already aware, I'll be doing this in English, and I'll be relying on Kurt to tell me if I'm talking too fast, to wait for some kind of hand signal to slow down. But what I brought tonight is actually not a typeface design that I've been working on or been published or anything like that. It's a project of research that I've been doing, I've been thinking about for many years, and only recently had a chance to give it the time that it required. And it was about the ways that letter forms and typography have been used as a device of security over centuries. And this is a work in progress, so that you'll find that there are some questions that are unanswered, and some stories that are not quite finished, but I thought there was enough to show you. I think anyone who's done research projects know that they will expand and take over all of the available time that you have and then take more. So this is definitely what this is turned into, but I thought I would show you what I have so far. And I want to begin with what I think is the oldest and the most familiar form of security. It's actually something that's already made out of letters, and that is our autograph. We've been using our autograph for over 1,000 years to verify our identity and the authenticity of the document. But we also expect a signature to say something about ourselves, to have some kind of emotional component to show our personality. And these ideas about security and also the emotional dimension of the signature became unexpectedly part of a story in the American media in January of 2013, when President Obama nominated this fellow named Jack Lew to be, I'm not sure what the equivalent title would be in Austria, but it was the Secretary of the Treasury. And as with any nomination to this kind of post, there were questions about this person is the right one for the job, and is he qualified, would he be independent, and it was all good questions. And while this story was going on, a journalist was looking at part of Lew's achievements of work as in President Obama's staff, and he got a look at his signature. And before, people were talking about economic policies and the recovery of jobs and unemployment. Now they were talking about the signature. This was the story. And it's really amazing. But the reason behind this is that no other member of the president's cabinet needs to worry about what their signature looks like. The Secretary of Transportation or Agriculture or anything like that. I have no idea what their signature looks like. But in this case, the signature of the Treasury Secretary shows up right there on every bill. Made while that person is in office. It ends up on the money every time. So it really meant a lot to people. They would be carrying this signature around in their pockets. So it was people took it personally. And the story would not go away. And eventually, President Obama had to acknowledge the story in a press conference. He said, "I had never noticed Jack's signature, And when this was highlighted in the press, I considered rescinding my offer to appoint him. Take this back. Jack assures me that he's going to work to make at least one letter available in order not to debase our currency, should it be confirmed as Secretary of Treasury. I'm a designer, I'm not a historian, I don't know the history of the presidency, but I'm pretty sure that the President of the United States has never scolded anyone in public for their handwriting. I could be wrong about that. But in the end, Jack Lew was confirmed as Secretary of the Treasury, and this is what showed up on the money. He went into a room and practiced his signature. I'm not quite sure what this says, but I think we can agree that these are letters, more or less. But this brings us to where I've spent most of my research in this issue of letter forms and security, which is in the design of banknotes. I've actually been collecting banknotes for longer than I've been drawing type, and I've always thought it'd be a fascinating thing to look into to see how these little tiny letters go and fight and push back against the forgers. So there are two kinds of forgery that I'll look at. One is the fabrication. This is the construction of something that didn't exist before, and making it look like some official body entity had made this. So I started the story back in the colonial period of the United States with this fellow, Benjamin Franklin. And he was a scientist and a statesman and a philosopher, but through all of his life, he was also a printer. He started working as a printer at the age of 12, and I think he was working as a printer, I think until 3 weeks before he died. It was part of everything that he did. There was always something, he always had a press in the back running something. And from I believe it was 1734 to 1761, Franklin was the official printer for the state of Pennsylvania, and that meant that he was responsible for printing out declarations from the government, of the state government, and records of the sessions of the legislature. But most importantly, it meant that he was responsible for printing the money for the state of Pennsylvania. Back then, each state made its own money and made its own rules about that. Even decided what denominations there should be. Some states wanted to print dollars, some other states wanted to make shillings. It was a very American way of doing it, because everyone for themselves. But Franklin brought all of this sort of the scientific genius that we know him for. He brought all of it to bear to work on the problem of making Pennsylvania's money more secure, more difficult to forge. And many of these devices were actually typographic. And one is actually this typeface that you see here. This is 40 Spanish mil dollars, value gold, silver, so on. That is this typeface. It's not known exactly who designed this or produced this typeface. It was produced, I think, about 1690 or so, somewhere in England. And Franklin bought a font of this type when he was apprenticing to printers in London when he was a teenager. And I don't know why Franklin bought this type and brought it home to America. I don't know if he was thinking about security. But Franklin effectively had a typeface that no one else could use, no one else could access. Certainly in the States, no one would have the ability to go over to England and figure out where this thing came from and get a copy of it for themselves. And he must have understood that there was a kind of power in having something, in having a type that no one else had. So he used this this typeface again and again and again for decades on almost all the money that he printed. But Franklin thought that he could do more to make his money more secure. And at one point we start to see some homemade experiments. Look at the word invented here. There's something that's very kind of crude about the way these letters are made. I think it's either Franklin himself or someone near him tried cutting these letters to be used on press to have this effect of leaning backwards, which typefaces didn't do this sort of thing at the time. And to be sure that nobody missed this strange behavior, he put a forward-sloping script on both sides of this, the back-sloping word in the middle. But if we take a moment to examine this more closely, it's actually even more complicated than that. Because there's this back-sloping design, a bit crude, but you can see what he was thinking. This forward-sloping design of this funny English script from 100 years before. The slightly different slope of the Caslon kind of metallic, the upright Caslon Roman. Then in that first line, there are actually back-sloping letters in there and Roman upright letters that actually switch inside one word. So if we come back to this and look at this again, that this is really quite complicated, and a forger would not be able to get through the first 3 lines of this bill and be able to reproduce all of the conflicting shapes and orientations that Franklin put in there. In 1775, Franklin was made the first ambassador from America over to France. And as with everything else, Franklin included printing as part of his job, part of his diplomatic work. And part of that was printing up records for all of the loans of one after another, heaps of money that he convinced the French to send over to the new American nation. Another thing he had to print as being ambassador were passports for visiting Americans. And these would be an especially tempting target for forgers, because if you could forge a passport, you could sell it for an awful lot of money. So Franklin spent a lot of time thinking about how to make these difficult to forge. And he commissioned his friend, the type founder, Simon Pierre Fournier, in Paris, to design a custom typeface. The story is a little fuzzy, but it seems, though, as if Franklin himself sketched out a few letters, described this idea, and gave it to Fournier, and Fournier turned out this beautiful script typeface and sent it back to Franklin. And Franklin used that to print passports for all of the for Americans passing through France. Fournier agreed to not use this for anything else ever. So this is exclusive, and that's where much of the security would come from. But back in the United States, none of the other printers had the kind of resources that Franklin did. They couldn't do really elaborate, inventive scientific experiments. They couldn't call out famous designers and get special commissions from them. They had to make a strategy out of what they had in their shop. They're entirely on their own. And one set of printers that was especially inventive and successful with using just what they had with them was the Jonah Green and later his widow, Anne Catherine Green, who were the printers for the state of Maryland. And their strategy was to use something called secret marks. And a secret mark is a deliberate flaw or error that's put into the typography of the bill. The idea would be that a forger would not notice this deliberate mistake and inadvertently correct it, and then by doing that reveal themselves to be forgers. So there are like little traps set all over the bill hiding. So if we look at the first line here, where it says indented, if you come up close to that, you realize that something's a little bit funny here, because that second D is not a D. That's actually a key turned over. And if you're just looking at this quickly, you have no problem reading this as a D. You go right past it. And if you don't know it's there, and you're trying to reproduce this, you would go and get another lowercase d, and then you give yourself away. And these kinds of rotations and inversions and switches are all over the bills that the Green family produced. So just about every time the city of London is mentioned, the ends are almost always upside down like this. In another bill, some member of the family took a file or a knife or something to this lowercase g on the bottom here and cut through the bowl. Really, really quiet change. And to be sure that I was seeing something that was really there and not some variation of printing, I looked at 3 or 4 or 5 different copies of each one of these notes to be sure that this really was there. And someone really did cut through the bottom of that G. And they often planned out the arrangement of words, that if they did something to one of these letters, there would be sort of a normal version of it very close by. So that you can just look at the G above it compared to the one below and see the little tiny difference that was slipped in. This is, I think, one of my favorite examples. I'll tell you why in a moment. But if we look at the 3 O's here, I think you can see what's coming. One of these is not an O. It's actually an old style 0. And if you want to confirm that, you can go and look at the date down at the bottom of the building and see that's what the 0 really is. We also see the period dropped off of the baseline, which is something that they like to do. I was quite happy, I find this one especially satisfying, because I was working with a museum in New York that had this large collection of colonial banknotes. There were all these images from. And I pointed out this particular switch, and he told me that the scholars and the collectors have been writing about the Green family and these notes from Ireland for 40 and 50 years. And talking about all the little traps that they put into this, and no one had ever spotted this one. I actually added to the knowledge of the history of his time, because God, that felt so good. There's, I think it's maybe one more. And again, we worked it out so that the 2 letters next to each other. You're seeing a lowercase I that does what you think it would. And then just below it, a lowercase I where the dot has been pushed off to the side. And I don't know how many people here have had the opportunity to set type by hand and print it on a press. But to get this to work, someone would need to take a saw and cut through a piece of metal and then shift it over and find some way of making sure that none of these pieces of metal move on the bed of the press over thousands of impressions. And it would be a lot of work to do this, but they went ahead and did it, and I think it's one of the more subtle traits they put in. I'll back up for a moment for a little bit of history lesson. That in what we call sort of the word of endurance, well, I think the old style variety category of italics. The much older form is the one you see on the right here. This is a very beautiful, graceful form with the stroke coming up from the bottom and down and over and back around. And it's really quite lovely, but it can be mistaken for a B very easily. So a little bit later in history, the typewriters thought they could be a little bit maybe more practical and more clear about this, and they the age that you see on the left there that takes its structure from lowercase n. This is a fiction of the 20th century that offered both forms for so the user to make up their own mind. Okay, hold that idea. We'll come back to 1774, back to the Green family, and in the middle of your fourth line, you see the word exchange. Except, of course, that does not say exchange. That says something that I cannot pronounce. Exchange? I don't know. But because the H could be mistaken for a B, they put in a B, so it could be mistaken for an H. Genius. Nearby in Virginia was this printer whose, unfortunately, this printer did not put their name on this work, so I can't tell you who this is. But this printer used a similar strategy, but used the structure of the black of the front door to hide some traps. There's one in the first line where this is supposed to say bill. It's supposed to be capital B. And it really, really obviously is not. And I think that was put there so that the forger would spot this and think, aha, I got it, you can't trick me. I'm going to put a Q in here. But the real trap is actually a few lines below. This is a decoy. The real trap is here in the word treasury. And the third letter there should be E. But if we look elsewhere on the bill, we find the word currency, and those do not match. So look a little bit elsewhere on the bill, we find the word Virginia, which is spelled correctly. And see that that's actually a G. So again, I can't pronounce this word that's in the middle here. It should be treasury, but it's gathering, something. I don't know. But I imagine this one would have been quite effective because these kinds of letter forms were not so familiar to recognize even then. So this swap would have been this change of B to G would have been. You need to be looking very, very closely to see that this trick had been made. There's one from 1789, and this is from the Bank of North America, which is one of the early attempts to make one currency that goes across all of the states, sort of like a bit like the euro, except it didn't last a year. And this was printed by Benjamin Franklin's grandson, Benjamin Franklin Leach. And he accompanied his father over to France, and while his grandfather was busy being a diplomat, his grandson went to went to the foundry of Francois Didot to learn the craft of punch cutting and type founding. And came back, while his training was not quite done, but it's likely that Beige cut these bizarre letters with the extra loops and crosses running through them, strings running through them, and a cedilla coming off of the T. Why not? But I think this is, I'm pretty confident saying that this is, I think, the strangest type that has ever shown up on any piece of American currency ever. And I think anyone who would have tried to forge this would have been just, would have just stopped and just given up, trying to figure out where to find these letters and if they should bother trying to make this. But I think it's important to remember that while in just about every example that I showed you, there was a war going on. The Americans were fighting the British to become an independent nation. And the money was actually a central part of that conflict. So in the spring of 1775, the war officially begins, open conflict. And I think it was 3 weeks later, this body, the Continental Congress, started printing money. They understood that this was an essential part of keeping all the colonies together so they could fight the British as one group. And by the end of 1775, the British began a program to counterfeit all of these bills and wreck the economy, to destroy the economy of their opponent. And unfortunately for the Americans, the British were really very good at this. And a few years later, the Continental Congress, sort of the beginning of the American government, had to produce this official announcement describing the British counterfeit bills, at least the ones that they knew about, and describe them so that the colonists could identify them and destroy them, or identify who was trying to distribute them. And I can't, I won't read the entire thing here, it goes on for a while, but I have read this, and 75% of this is about the letter forms. At the same super tiny detail that we were just looking at. There's a line in here warning people to look for a lowercase y whose descendant is too long, and to look for a lowercase c that is shifted out of alignment, or vertical stems that are a little too heavy. And it's, I think, one of, maybe there are other cases, but it's, I think, one of the few cases that I've seen where typography and awareness of typography and the shape of letter forms was actually a matter of national security. That this was one of the few ways that the Americans could protect their economy from being destroyed. Unfortunately, it didn't work, and the Continental dollar was abandoned. I think a year after this was printed, the dollar was worth, I think, 2 cents, because no one trusted it anymore, which is exactly what the British wanted. But there's it's funny how history moves in cycles, because it's only 25 years later or so, the British had a very bad problem of forgery on their hands. And after something like 100 years of being at war with, I think it was the French, and then the Dutch, and then the French again, and then the Americans, and then probably the French again, the English, the Bank of England was broke. They had no money left. All these wars were really expensive. So they took all of the gold coins out of circulation, took them all back in the public, and replaced them with these banknotes, 1 and 2 and 5 pounds. And they had never made banknotes in these small denominations before. And that sounds like a minor point, but it meant that with the denomination, the amount of money being represented being so small, it meant that these would now be part of transactions in between strangers. And that is a necessary sort of requirement for forgery to succeed. Before, these were in much larger values. So these would be transactions where people would know each other. So forgery can't work then. So the Bank of England began to produce these notes, which simply called the white notes, in 1795. And by 1818, 300 people had been executed, had been put to death for forging these notes because they were so easy to do. And hundreds more after that sent to the prison colony in Australia on the other side of the world, which made the history of Australia a little strange all by itself. Of course, there's great stories there, but I don't know if you get to that. But, so the Bank of England solved one financial problem, but just replaced it with another financial problem, and also made this tragic social problem in the process. They really didn't understand what to do about this. So there is this professional organization called the Society of Arts, Manufacture, and Commerce. And they gathered together ideas from, I believe it was 19 different people. And it was all on the subject of how to make British money harder to forge. How can we make this more secure? And they published their findings in this report that came out in 1819. And one suggestion came in from an engraver named Richard Williamson, which was to use this new machine called a geometric lathe, something called a Rose engine, to make this super complicated pattern of overlapping lines with this ornamental lettering in the middle. And his suggestion was to leave the fronts of the bills alone. Don't need to do anything with that. Just print this on the back, and then you're done. Because no forger will ever be able to keep up with this. And he was probably right, but the Bank of England insisted that the backs of the bills stay blank. I'm still struggling to understand why they wanted that, but they did. But what's bringing us to this report is this fellow, Thomas Curson Hansard. He was the official printer for the English Parliament. And his proposal was all about the design and manufacture of the type that would be used. So part of his report, he suggests that the smallest kind of type, called diamond, is so difficult of execution and so little in demand that, as appears from the testimony of the catalog, there are not more than 4 or 5 persons in England who can cut the punches for it. By fixing upon an unusual form for the type, in which, for example, the letter shall lean the contrary way to italic type, and making it penal, illegal, to execute any such, except for the Bank of England, a great difficulty in the first instance will be imposed to the forger. This way too complicated way of saying, let's take this size of type called diamond, which our more modern numerical system would be about 4.5 points. Let's take this one size of type and make it something special that can only be used for the Bank of England. It would be like what in America we would call a controlled substance, like heroin or something, where it can only be, or morphine, where it can only be used in this one particular instance and everything else is illegal. And Hansard also had some ideas about how this special 4.5 point type would be used to, for instance, to spell out the name of the denomination. We've now call this ASCII art, but this is from nearly 200 years ago. It was from the reign of George III, which I still think of this when I see someone draw some little picture with some monospace typeface in the bottom of the email. But this was Hansard's idea of what the money should look like. This is not a picture with some commentary down below. This is the entire thing. And even still, I think we have much more sophisticated experience and more open minds, but still, this looks so not like money. This looks like a page out of a newspaper or something, and not something that you could use to buy a newspaper. But anyway, it was too strange. The Bank of England, and they ignored this and pretty much everything else in that report. Unfortunately for them. But this idea of very small type being a kind of obstacle, a way to make forgery more difficult, came back, except in engraving, in engraving plates for printing rather than casting type. So, starting in the middle of the 1800s and progressing towards the 1900s, the federal government of the United States started taking more of responsibility for printing the money. It stopped being about the states, started being about the whole country. And the technology for engraving printing plates had gotten, by this point in 1879, had gotten so good, and the craftsmen were so talented at this that they could actually make letters so small that they would actually stuff them inside other letters. And honestly, I think to some extent the engravers were just showing off how good they were. Because they could have just put letters in there and be done with it, but there are actually 5 different styles in there. There's a serif Roman, and a serif italic, and a sans serif Roman, a sans serif italic, and a black letter. And they, it's almost like they couldn't stop themselves from stuffing letters in there. If you look at the capital S there, the top serif has a little US hiding inside of it, another one down below. Look at the lowercase s. U, S. Those little jokes for themselves. But I think one of the best examples comes from this series from 1896. And the scholars and the historians often point to this series as some of the most beautiful money that the United States has ever produced. And I can't really argue with that because as an American, I cannot believe that our money ever looked like this. When I first saw a picture of this in the book, I thought it was for some mural, some painting on the wall that would be, so many meters high, stretch out like this. It's actually a piece of paper that's about this big. But it has all that power and the grandeur in it. And this series was all about allegorical figures, sort of semi-mythological things, people. And in this one, we get the figure of history, literally taking youth under her arm and providing a lesson. And get the first 132 words of the Constitution spelled out here. And this is engraved, it's not typed. But if this were typed, this would be, I think, 2.25 points high. It's incredibly small. But I've seen this bill in person, and there's no problem at all in the ingredients. It's done so beautifully. I'll go off on a little tangent for a moment here. This is the $5 bill from the same series. And again, I still find it hard to believe that American money ever looked like this. But also, it seems like all you need are some explosions and flames in the background and a line of names across the bottom, and this is a poster for a movie. It worked perfectly. But this was another set of semi-mythological figures doing important things. And in this one we get the embodiment of electrical power, holding up what I first think that this is a chicken drumstick. But it's actually a light bulb, which makes much more sense. And she is declaring electricity to be the dominant power throughout the planet. It's very full speed ahead, spirit of progress. And she's also semi-topless. There's really no good reason for that. This is not part of the story that's being told, but it's someone's idea of how you do neoclassical things. And this caused a huge scandal. And there were parts of these upper tiers of upper levels of society that thought that this was just incredibly vulgar and obscene. And there were, in particular around Boston, there were banks that refused to take this note on deposit because of all the controversy that was happening around this one part of this one bill. And the Treasury Department was working on this essentially a bug fix, a change to the illustration that would just take this one piece of clothing and just move it over and get on with it. But the controversy became so loud and so embarrassing that the Treasury Department decided that all they could do was cancel everything. This $5 bill, there's a $1 bill, there's a $2 bill that I didn't show you. There's a 10 and a 20 that are about to be printed. There's a 50 and 100 that were in the early stages of design. Everything was canceled. All the people, all the artists that were brought in to do this, they're all sent home. And 3 years later, the Treasury Department produced was deliberately the most boring thing they could think of. And if you take this, no, I should point out that bird right there, the eagle, is totally naked. They did not say anything. But if you take this design, you take the lettering across the top, you straighten that out, take out the curves. Take one of these portraits down in the middle of this oval, blow it up, enlarge it, move it into the middle, you get this. And if you take out the blue, put in green, take out anything to do with silver, and you have the design that's been embarrassing the Americans for almost 100 years. I always wondered why, especially comparing it to the design of money in Europe, how did the Americans get stuck with something so ugly? And this was why. That there was a scandal, there was a controversy in 1896 that called for damage control. It called for a political defense. And that's what these bills are made of. No one even remembers what this controversy was, but the money still looks like that. I think that there should be an entire book or movie or I don't know what about what went on with the money in 1896, because it went from something so beautiful and so inventive to, well, that in only a few years. So, okay, I will stop my rant. But I can move on to the second kind of forgery that we can talk about, which is alteration, which is to take something that really was produced by some official body and change it in some way to make it more valuable or make it mean something else. And there are a number of different sort of examples and strategies that I found for this. One was these lottery tickets from France. There's a whole series of lottery tickets from France. And for this series that ran through the 30s, someone, I'm not sure who it was, designed this set of numbers that do not match anything that any type founder could offer. And the strategy here seems to be to put these great big serifs, almost like obstacles, into the shape of each letter, so that if you try to change the shape of one of these letters, you'd have to deal with these serifs that would just make it too complicated to do. So I should also point out this is the only time I've ever seen someone get serifs onto figure 8. So I have to give that some respect. There's another series happening at the same time, also in France, also in the 30s, that use an entirely different set of figures that look bizarre and somehow completely French. And who else would make this? But we find things like this, where as a type designer, if one of my students, one of my designers showed me this, I would say, okay, pick one. Make up your mind and pick one. Make the shapes work like this or like that, but these are not getting along with each other. But in this case, that's the point, that you cannot make a 6 out of a 9 or a 9 out of a 6. In a similar sort of way, I would not expect the bottom of the 3 and 5 to be exactly the same. The reading would be a bit different to be able to work, but they ought to be pretty close to each other. They should be talking to each other pretty closely. But here, these two shapes have nothing to say to each other. And again, that's the point. And I'm so happy. The French continued their efforts to use type to make the lottery tickets more secure. So we've come here to look at these numbers here. And what we find here is something that, again, shapes that just don't show up in anyone's catalog, but they're made of this very peculiar kind of recipe of holes and dots, which I think are there to just make it more difficult to try to alter any of these numbers into another one. And you see the 6 and the 9 are deliberately different kinds of shapes, pushed away from each other. It's also the first example of what I call self-verifying numbers, where the name of that digit is spelled out beneath it, either in full or with a shortened. And there's a similar kind of strategy appeared in the United States in the in the 1950s from the American Totalizator Company, which I always thought sounded very sinister somehow. But the American Totalizator made machines that would take bets at racetracks for horse races. They would, if you would go and place a bet, you'd give them your money, and your bet would go into the totalizator, and that would calculate how much money you would win if you bet on the correct horse. It would calculate this on the fly with just gears, and there's no computer involved in this. It was an amazing piece of machinery, and in the 50s, they added a new piece of measure of security to the ticket that you would get after you placed your bet. That across the middle of the ticket was this unique code for each race, these 5 letters. And these codes were unique not just in the letters that were used, but in the way that those letters were shaped. So there were, I think, 8 different styles of letters, none of which matched anything from any type counter. And I did the math a little while ago, and I think between 26 letters and 8 different styles in 5 different positions, I think it meant that there were 353 billion combinations that could be worked out. So they did quite well to, the system worked quite well for making these difficult to forge. And also the color of the paper would change randomly. So you couldn't take a letter off of one bill and one ticket and put it on another. It just wouldn't work. And at about the same time, from the Soviet Union, the design of lottery tickets took on a strategy that you'll see will look familiar for a moment. If you look at the serial number down at the bottom there, this looks like, at first, like a standard, heavy, modern kind of thing, or it's a Victorian kind of design with a little bit of dimensional highlight. But if you come up close to this, you'll see that they're actually decorated with little versions of themselves. It's like they're pregnant. The 9 is having twins. And again, a little while later, a little further south, I found these examples from Bulgaria. I put these in here just because I just love the way this really looks. But the really amazing part of this is, again, it's a little bit of a tangent, is what the rest of this bill looks like, or this ticket looks like. And as an American, I can't imagine any branch of government ever producing something that looks like this. I mean, perhaps things kind of like this in Austria all the time, but this was the National Lottery of Bulgaria from the mid-70s to the early 90s. And I still find it just astonishing that they look like this. If Americans actually produced lottery tickets that looked like this, I would actually buy it. But no, what we have looks awful. But, so I can finish by bringing us up to the current day. And every weekday morning in Manhattan, these carts will appear selling coffee and donuts. And I believe it's the only reason that anything gets done in New York before 12 o'clock. And they're replaced soon after by a different set of carts which serve lunch. It's the only reason why anything gets done before 3. But if you're ever in New York, and you pass by one of these, stop and have a look right up there, and you'll see this, which is the license provided to that person from the Department of Health, allowing them to operate something that serves food on the street. And I spent a few weeks last year going around the city chasing these carts and taking pictures of their licenses, and eventually found enough to put together a complete set. This is where the research ends. I have not been able to understand really anything about these numbers. Starting with the fact that the zero is called cipher, which is and also spelled like that, is a British term, and no American would say that. But also just in the shapes of the bend in the middle of the one, or I'm not sure what's going through the four. Some parts are made of straight lines, like the middle of the 8. Other parts are made of great curves, like 2 and 3. I have no idea what's going on here. Not just top and bottom. I don't really understand. But this is where it said at the start of this is a research project that's been in my head for many years, and it's still ongoing, sort of in process. And there are other pieces to this that I was able to bring tonight, because we would be here all night. But I wanted to give you some ideas about how letter forms have produced or have performed this job. Sort of, sometimes in secret, sometimes out in the open. Fought this battle against forgers, because I think it's something that hasn't really been investigated or talked about. So that is it for me. Thank you. The colonial banknotes were from this archive in New York, and the later American bills from one of the chicken drumstick. Those are from the Smithsonian Museum in Washington.
And the lottery things?
Those are all just things I found on my own.
Letters saved now when they're used or use it digitally. We can scan everything, we can put it everything. It's not, how can we make it safe now?
Well, I think the technique that's used now, certainly through banknote design, I'm still looking for examples of things like lottery tickets and passports and other sorts of things like that work. But these days, the security is coming from chemistry, the kind of ink, the kind of paper, rather than the typography. And that's also one of the things I would say is to provide a look at a technique that's just not used anymore. Because suppose in the long run, using special magnetic ink that changes color and a certain kind of light or whatever, that's harder to forge than computer picture and upside down. But still, I think there's, especially that strategy with secret marks, I think says a lot, just if nothing else, about how we read and what we notice and what we don't notice. All right?
Yeah. Has anyone with their typefaces been printed on a dollar bill or something similar? Has any of your typefaces been printed on something that has to be proof of forgery?
I'm not sure I understand. Is like, are they produced digitally?
If one of your typefaces,
on mine?
Yeah.
Oh.
One of your typefaces has ever been used on something that has to be proved.
The postage stamps in the U.S. actually use something of mine that I did. It was kind of a nice surprise to have that. I don't think it was put there to be to provide any security. I think they used it because they could print it really small and it worked well. It's made to be used in small sizes. But yeah, I haven't seen any example of my own things on money. I would love to try it. Design that's sort of my next dreams, but I don't think it's going to happen in America.
You should come up with your intelligence.
Yeah, that would be great. No, I've got all kinds of ideas I could give them, but I don't think it's going to change. What else?
Is there any discussion to change the design of the dollar in the future? Because the Swiss are in the process of changing the design of their banknotes. I don't know if you know the discussion, because there was a petition that was won by I guess. But this was too modern for the people of Switzerland, and so they decided to take the second of the competition.
Okay.
And now they're going to the process is running now. And also the euro is changing now. This period the 5 million, the 10 million, and so on. And is there any discussion in America? As I understood, since 100 years, the dollar hasn't significantly changed. Is there discussion in the designers?
Yeah, designers have all kinds of fantasies. Changing the money, and I've seen 4 or 5 different designers and putting a lot of effort into their idea of what the money could be, and a lot of them are really beautiful and inventive, for a country, mostly because the population is so big, there's really no way to get whatever it was, 320 million people to agree on what the money wants to turn into. So the only thing that's happened is a program that started, I think, 20 years ago, to very slowly introduce a few new features, starting with the 50, and then the 20, and then the 10, and I think they're going to the 5. And to introduce a few new devices into the design, but not really make it look all that much different. I think it actually would make it look worse. It looks like someone spilled coffee. But it's supposedly harder to avoid. I don't really know. But I think that's because of how many people are involved. I think that's probably the only thing that's going to happen. I think if we go back to a system where the states make their own money, I think that'd be great. I think New York would have the best looking money. And the rest of the country they can figure it out themselves. But yeah, New York would have great looking dollars.
I was thinking now about the super weird numbers of the footwearers. Is there a degree of sense in using these weird numbers?
why?
Because I think these numbers are very digital, so you could scan them, so it would be easy, it wouldn't be no problem to fortune.
I'm not sure. That's part of what you might
I
understand.
mean, I think it's just kind of a tradition to make it look like fortune.
I guess it's yeah, I'm really not sure what the story is there. Because it doesn't. I've looked at the type that is produced by other kinds of devices that put serial numbers on things, whether it's lottery tickets or ticket stubs or packaging or anything like theater tickets or whatever, and none of them are anywhere close to this. So I don't understand where this stuff came from. It seemed to have, there's a play of orphan that has no parents, came out of nowhere. Yeah, I think like any other kind of license, there could be a lot of money to be made in forging these and selling them for people who don't want to pay however much money they need to the city to get one of these things. But yeah, I have to find someone in the government of the city of New York who can tell me what this stuff's about. Definitely.
So you would have us next time.
Yes, hopefully I'll have an answer. I've been chasing that particular one for the rest of my life. I need to get